We're back with Season 6, Episode 22, P.P.O.V, Pony Point of View. This is the episode in which Rarity, Applejack, and Pinkie Pie go off on a high-seas adventure and then crash. And they all give their own perspective on it at the end. Before I go any further, this is probably a good example of an episode that I enjoy, even though I probably should. Now, to explain that a little bit, I don't know where this accent's coming from. Well, explain that a little bit. This is a type of episode I enjoy quite a lot. Actually, it's two types of episode I enjoy quite a lot. Hear me out for a second. I'm going to use Star Trek to explain both because, as we just discussed in the last episode, I can talk about Star Trek right off the top of my head. I got this. First of all, there's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called A Matter of Perspective. In that episode, they use the holodeck to recreate a few minutes or hours of a certain event in order to try and show what actually happened while investigating something. In the process, we see Riker's perspective, the wife's perspective, and the assistant's perspective, right? And each one of them gives a pretty differing account. Cool, I'm with that. That actually makes perfect sense. After all, that is the overall approach. And that is an episode type that I actually enjoy quite a lot. It's not done all that often, but the reason it tends to be enjoyable is because there's a lot of stuff you can do narratively to play with this kind of concept. In addition to the obvious matter of perspective core element, there's also the fact that it shows... It allows you to show things and imply things in a manner that is simultaneously very overt and actually quite subtle. Because at that point, it stops becoming this is a recreation of the events that happened, and instead becomes this is someone's narration of what happened. And when you're giving a narration, you can do things that let you know about stuff like, for example, this is what they value, this is what they care about, this is where their mindset is, this is how they're trying to slant a story. How someone tells a story says a lot about that person, and thus there's a lot of narrative tools there that can be used to good effect. So that's really cool. The other episode I want to mention is actually a Voyager episode. That is the episode Living Witness. Now, probably a lot less of you remember that episode, so for those of you who don't recall, the episode Living Witness is an episode of Voyager where the Doctor, or more accurately a copy of the Doctor, wakes up 900 years in the future and goes through a historical recreation of evil Voyager. And they're all just cartoonishly, ham-fistedly evil versions of themselves. Like, I'm not talking like Mirror Universe evil, I'm talking worse than that. We're talking straight up, just give me a second. I just want to torture him and butcher him. And it's hysterical, right? Now, that is actually an excellent episode. Easily one of my favorite Voyager episodes, for reasons that are unrelated to that point. That just adds flavor to the actual point of that episode. But the flavor is what I'm focusing on right now. I don't want to talk about Living Witness right now. What I want to talk about is why that tends to be a good thing for fiction, especially for long-standing fiction. It allows you to stretch. Or more accurately, it allows the writers, the directors, and the actors to stretch. Episodes where characters act out of character deliberately, intentionally, tend to lead to good stuff, because it allows them to stretch out and try new and fun things. Farscape did this with the body swapping episode. Virtually every Star Trek show has done this with the Mirror Universe stuff, where we have, actors playing the Mirror Universe versions of themselves, etc. It's a strange thing to say, but deliberately out of character can lead to some very fun and enjoyable moments, and it's not an exception here. The only exception I would say is that alternate Pinkie Pie in, I believe it was Applejack's story, was just kind of okay. But all the other alternates were awesome. Yar, 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 was awesome. And seeing Rarity, I actually wrote down this quote, if you'll forgive me. Where's the exact quote? Oh, darling, that food isn't fit for a pony of proper breeding, darling, and refinement, darling. Just word for word quote there. So you can do some fun stuff with it, right? So the episode has two things going for it. Great premise. Now, I do want to mention as well, this is an episode I could probably spend a lot more time analyzing. Because what we're seeing, like I said earlier, is what matters to them and what annoys them from the other ponies and from what happens during the trip, based on what they do. And I'll bring up a specific example of that to show my work here. At one point in Pinkie Pie's retelling of the story, the camera actually bothers to pause and watch her as she goes over and sees the swell grab and pull some of her games overboard. And she hesitates for a moment, looks overboard, and actually looks sad before she goes back to the rest of the thing. Why is that relevant? Because Pinkie Pie, who is telling this story that we're watching to them, bothered to narrate that moment because that was where her focus was. In addition to differing perspectives not just being different people focus on different things. This is also one of the values of trying to get different people's opinions or word. I can't think of the word all of a sudden. Different people's evidence, verbal evidence. God, I can't think of what it's called. On a specific event, because the more people you get giving the blank about the specific event, the more likely you'll have a more accurate picture of what actually happened. Account is not the word I'm looking for. It's a legal term. You get someone up there and they give a blah about something. I can't even freaking think of it. This is also something that is very relevant when it comes to history. A lot of historical records. Testimony. Thank you. That is the word. You have multiple people giving testimony about an event, you have a more likely chance of getting an accurate account of what happened. And again, this matters very much historically because, you know, there's a lot of points in history where we have one or two people's accounts of that, and those are probably inaccurate because it was only from one person's perspective. And what they were focusing on may or may not have been all of the story and blah, 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 blah. You get it, right? This came up for me a lot semi-recently when I was going through all the TOS stuff, because there's actually a lot of behind-the-scenes material for Star Trek the original series, and a huge amount of it contradicts each other. So what you do is you try to see what everyone says, and you kind of triangulate the truth from that, right? Try to come up with something that is a likelihood of what actually happened, which leads us neatly back to this episode. Because if you pay attention, not only is what they're focusing on relevant and highlights their mentalities with regards to what they cared about and what they were thinking of the other ponies there, but it also has fairly relatively common threads across them. And those common threads are deliberately established. Oh yeah, before I forget, let's add the Rarity Crush. So sick of Rarity Crushes. There it is. But yeah, finding common consistencies is part of the fun of this episode for me, and honestly, I actually really enjoy that aspect of it. It's probably, in my opinion, the second best element of the episode. The first, of course, just being the silly fun. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to try this very carefully here. Polikas Jalu, thank you very, very much for that sub. Much appreciate. Thank you. If you happen to know where you'd like to put that, please let me know, and I'm sorry for butchering your username. No, Mr. Red, I'm afraid you are physically incapable of doing that. Bloodborne, you got it. That I can do. Yeah, I like that. There isn't a tremendous amount of amazing animation in this episode, which I know I gush a lot about the animation in this show, but I really got to give special praise. In fact, actually, what I would specifically say if I was reviewing this episode is there's a lot of good storyboarding. There's a lot of thought put into who should be where and what, and doing what, regardless, relative to what's going on the screen. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Anyways, so the episode. Now that we've established the premise, the theme, the concepts, let's talk about the episode proper. The cold open immediately established something is wrong. First of all, she's bringing her friends there because something happened and something is an issue. So that's very, very quickly and very efficiently established. Cool, I'm with it. The next thing that happens immediately is we see that Spike's old cookies are back. It's been a while. Then the pets deliver the notes because this is apparently Hogwarts. Next thing that happens is Rarity delivers this huge note. This is where the Rarity Crush comes in because apparently Spike had been polishing his scales. And then, of course, we have Applejack's note, which is like 3 sentences. And then Pinkie Pie's, which is on a... So we cut to Rarity. That poor crab. He just wanted to hang out. I love Twilight's tone being so calm and just, I would just like to know what's happening as she's not handing, but, you know, she's telekinetically handing the quill and the air spike. Deal with this. Like I said, excellent storyboarding in this one. And then Rarity does something that is extremely human. I'm sure most of you have done this at some point or another, and frankly, I'm sure all of you have seen this at some point or another in your life. Oh, I couldn't possibly tell you about such and such. Oh, I don't want to bore you with such and such. Oh, I had this cool such and such, but I don't want to waste your time with it. Translation. We really want to tell you about this thing. Now, in some cases, and this is a little sitcom-y, someone's like, nope. And then they're like, oh, okay, fine, I'll tell you. But what usually happens in real life is more like we're waiting for the person to express interest and be like, please tell me. And at that point, it's permission. It's like, oh, okay, hang on, I can tell you. Okay, so let me share this. Rarity totally pulls that. Also, she gets the ice cream. Gotta have the ice cream. She's been through so much. So traumatic. So then we have the Rarity story. Dun, dun. What's the flag on the boat? It looks actually pretty British, if I'm being honest, but it's not the equestrian flag. I paused to double check. Do they have a Marine Corps in Equestria? Anyways, I know, it's weird. That's the very first thing I noticed, but what do you want from me? No, the apple is on the sail. The flag is above that. It's on the very top mast. It looks like, I can probably describe it visually. It looks like there's something on the bottom. It looks like some kind of plane or something. And then it's got the sun's rays kind of coming up, and it's kind of light blue and orangish. Anyways, no idea what that is. So, naturally, Rarity shows up, and she has a very small bag. Okay, real talk, I could spend an enormous amount of time analyzing every tiny detail in this episode. Speaking as someone who's been getting more and more into visual media and visual storytelling, can I just say that I've started appreciating even more than I already did all the effort, time, and thought that is put into every tiny little detail when it comes to these sort of things. There's so much. There's so much. And I don't want to bore you, so I didn't actually write down every tiny detail, because I totally freaking could have. It's very clear that, again, the storyboarding in this episode was very tight, and they very clearly thought about everything and what should be where and why. Because there's an explanation for everything, if you look at it. But she comes on, one helper, one tiny little purse, which is like this big, right? The first sign that there's something off with that, other than the fact that she bought one tiny purse, which is already out of character for her, is the fact that she lifts this giant tray of food out of it. Again, not going to go into all the details. But then we see Pinkie. Quick note, this is bloody subtle. Pinkie and Rarity are both wearing life vests. Applejack is not. Relevance? Well, from what we understand, all of them were in fact wearing life vests. And the episode makes a point of visually showing them wearing life vests consistently, because this is still a kids show, and kids should know that as long as you're on a boat, you should probably have a life vest on. That is actually a legitimately important message that I'm totally with. Why is this relevant? Because the fact that Applejack didn't have a life vest on in Rarity's telling shows the slanting that's already about to happen. She is actively lowering her opinion and perspective of Applejack by saying, oh, and she didn't even... It's the kind of thing like, I bet she didn't even wash her hands as she got out of the bathroom. That kind of a thing is what she's saying with that absence of a life vest. So, everyone in chat is like, Applejack is Ahab. No, Applejack is Jacques Cousteau. Now, I don't know how to spell that, so don't ask me to, but I swear, if you look up a picture of Jacques Cousteau, who was a famous pirate, you will see it. Happy Mother's Day, Baron. I need you to reassign a donation, by the way, if you would please, at some point. Which I have written down in a different document. Which is this document right here. Oh, thank you, SRS. There you go. That's how you spell it. You can Google that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So yeah, she's straight up, and I'm with it, totally. But you'll also notice that Rarity does two things immediately. First, and actually all of them do this, but Rarity starts the trend. The first thing she does is she starts to portray Applejack negatively in every respect. And I already referenced this with regards to the vest. But every scene that Applejack is in Rarity's story, Applejack is just awful. Like, actively rude and abrasive and constantly just completely nuts, right? Now, duh. But here's the other thing Rarity does, and all three of them do this. They slant the episode. Oh, not towards, not against someone, towards themselves. Real talk, this is so common a matter of human psychology. Human beings have a ridiculous tendency, whenever we tell stories about that include ourselves, to slant the story to make ourselves seem better. Now, I did this too. And I am going to use past tense because I put a significant and stalwart effort into no longer doing this. Because that sucks and I hate doing it. It's extremely natural to do. It is extremely normal for someone to do that. If you ever want to see a really obvious example of this, either be interacting with someone or watch something where someone has done something wrong. Maybe an actual crime. Maybe they just took the last cookie, or they didn't refill the coffee in the office. It doesn't matter what it is, but as long as they have actually done something wrong, and when asked about it, they will tell the story almost universally in a manner that makes them seem more sympathetic, even if they do admit to doing the wrong. So Rarity does this, because if you notice, she is polite and kind, and every time Applejack is ridiculous, she doesn't respond, "What the heck was that?" She says, "Oh, I'm so terribly sorry that my sandwiches have upset you so." Little stuff like that. So more slanting. Side note. Am I the only one who suddenly wants some cucumber sandwiches? That sounds good right about now. Get some good pita toast bread there, you know. Get some cream cheese. Anyways. Now, credit where credit is due. The episode transitions, and all of a sudden, Applejack has the bandana on. So it looks like she's got the one-eyed patch thing going. And I only mention that because as the next two stories show, what actually happened was there was the blindfold because of the piñata thing. And it's really tiny attention to detail, stuff like that, which is what I'm gushing, because holy crap. Anyways. So, then we have The Perfect Storm. Anybody remember that? Terrible movie. I mean, okay, I'm exaggerating. It's not that bad. It was just not a good movie. But if you've seen it, go Google right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go image Google search right now, The Perfect Storm poster. And you will see exactly what I'm referencing. So, the boat sank, and Rarity's into the ice cream. And Rarity directs to Pinkie Pie. That makes sense. If you remember, Pinkie Pie was only slanting against Applejack. But in Rarity's story, Pinkie Pie was fine. So that leads to Pinkie Pie's story. Naturally, Pinkie Pie slants as well. But she slants towards Applejack and against Rarity. This is when the borders start. I counted. There were 11 of them. Now, what's interesting about this, too... Yeah, poor Spike. What's interesting about this, too, is Rarity and Pinkie Pie both have a shared trait. Precision. No, seriously. Pinkie Pie remembers incredible amounts of detail about incredible amounts of people and things, and Rarity has a tremendous eye for niddling details and precise stuff and blah, blah, blah. I mean, hell, we've had at least one episode per pony that establishes these traits, and yet both of them exaggerate constantly in this episode. And I mention that because that starts to drag the episode down a little bit for me, but I'll come back to that later. Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put that, Baron. Anyways. Yeah, no kidding, Savacom. So then Rarity shows up in this diamond-encrusted navy outfit, which actually looks pretty cool. Probably sold a couple toys. And then we start to have the typical approach for this type of story, common threads. Now, we already talked about that, but this is when the common threads really start to show. You know, the number of the luggage, the snacks from Pinkie Pie, the snacks from Rarity, the games that Pinkie Pie brought, the, you know, kind of thing, all sorts of stuff. So we start to see those common elements and start to piece together and figure out. I'm going to talk about that, by the way, Savicom. We'll get to that in a second. Anyway, so everything starts to be put together. This is when I mentioned the focus thing. I've already talked about that, so I don't have anything else to add to that. But this is when we really see how each of them shows their perspective by what they're focusing on. And she naturally says, you need to go talk to Applejack. After all, Applejack is the one who's cool, but Rarity is the one who's horrible. So naturally, Applejack's going to back me up, right? I mean, I spoke well about her, so that's how social contracts work. God, this episode's making me hungry. Anyways, so we get to Applejack's story. First thing we see is Rarity is in the Titanic outfit. Pinkie Pie is really out of character in this one. It's funny, though, because Applejack does something that the other two kind of haven't done. She slants against both of them. She, as I already mentioned, Rarity, I quote it, oh, darling, 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 darling is Rarity. Tabitha St. Germain nails it, as usual. And Pinkie Pie is random to the point of being nonsensical. Okay. This, of course, leads to the episode, well, I mean, the events happen, Applejack stumbles into Rarity, the food gets knocked over. You know, everything kind of goes topsy-turvy. Pinkie Pie apparently forced her to play, you know, the pinata game. Couldn't think of it for some reason. Everyone's freaking out. Tabitha St. Germain does the really horrific laugh. Very Titus-style laugh. And this is when the episode finally starts to touch on a very important point, and then immediately sidesteps it. What do you do when friends, or people, disagree fundamentally? How do you get people to reconcile when neither of the people or all of the people involved don't actually think they did anything wrong? And why is that important? This is actually especially important compared to the episode we just covered. Remember, I discussed one of the important things is a genuine apology. And a genuine apology is the kind of apology where you are apologizing because you're sorry. You're not saying it to be forgiven. You're not saying it to make things better. I'm sorry. Bam. In a situation like this, Applejack and Rarity and Pinkie Pie do not feel like they have anything to be sorry for, ergo cannot be sorry. So what do you do? Now, there's actually a lot of answers to this, and it's one of those interesting, very nuanced, real-life kind of things. In my personal experience and observation, one of the most common things you do is you just bury it. You accept that this is an issue, and you just move on, and don't come back to it. I can actually tell you, I'm not going to, of course, but I can actually tell you that there are people right now in real life who are close to me, who I care about very dearly, who I have not forgiven for things they have done. And at this point, I probably never will forgive them for that. Now, that doesn't exactly come up regularly. The only reason I even remember that is because that's how my brain works. I sincerely doubt they even remember those incidents, but I do. But we move on, right? Yeah, that is why a lot of a very large amount of families tend to have the no polemic rule when it comes to family gatherings, to avoid situations like this. This is an extremely common problem in real life. Even on the internet, how many times will someone get into an argument with someone over something, probably something silly, or something incredibly important, like Star Wars, and in the consequence, they, you know, say things they don't really mean, and they yell at each other, and blah, 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 and just stuff happens, right? How do you deal with that? Now, of course, the answer is, there's no one answer to that. The answer is that you try to deal with that as best as you can. This is why I say the episode sidesteps this, because what the episode does is completely bypasses that incredibly complex, incredibly dangerous situation, and just says, oh, it was this other dude. They pulled in the third answer by having another blame party, and once they acknowledged the blame party, they were able to acknowledge the other people's perspectives. Yeah, pulling the bunyip out of the hat, as Raskor said earlier. Now, that being said, that is a valid approach. Not the third party thing. It's the breaker. Let me try to explain this a little bit. You've probably seen me do this. I've actually done this in my Discord many times, and done this in real life a few thousand, if not tens of thousands of times, because this is a very common thing I do. Person A. Person B. Me. You put a break in the middle of that. It's usually something humorous. Doesn't have to be. It kind of redirects the focus and attention towards something else. Why is that important? Well, the whole point of the break is to hit the pause button. As I've said gabrillions of times, pausing is the most important thing you can do when you're really upset. Because when you're really upset, not only does your brain literally not work properly, but you're going to be saying things or doing things that you don't actually mean. You hit that pause button, right? Everyone just takes a breather, cool off a little bit, and then they can come back at it with a different, with literally a different perspective. If you're paying attention, that is exactly what happens in this episode. Oh, sure, they have to do the runaround of coming up with the other blame figure of the bunyip, but once the pause has been hit, once they're no longer actively upset at each other, once that stream of heat is no longer being maintained, they realize, oh, you wanted to make a cruise for me, and you wanted to do this for me, and you wanted to do this for me. And, you know, sometimes this doesn't work. I've had plenty of times where it doesn't work, and the people just immediately go back to being angry. Or they ignore me completely. But that pause is extremely relevant, and is indeed something that can help with a situation like this. Quick aside, I said I'd talk about the storm. If you're paying attention, also true, Darth Madoro, if you're paying attention, there's this bit where, and I'm going to address that in a second, S.A. Ross, I swear to God. There's a bit where the ship is there, and they knock the cucumber sandwich over, and then there's the blips, and then there's this tiny little wave that goes by, and that's the storm. That's the giant wave that all three of them exaggerated, that capsized the boat. And we know, because this is no longer a narration being exaggerative, this is the event that actually happened, so... Best little detail of the episode right there. So, okay. S.A. Ross keeps talking about how Twilight is better than Glimmer. And I agree in this respect, although I do like Starlight better as a character. But Twilight is portraying how much better of a leader she is, and how much better of an organizer she is in this situation. Doesn't panic, figures out a situation in order to try and get the three coordinating, figures out a way in order to try and put that break into the middle of the argument, etc., etc. And it's worth noting that what Twilight is dealing with is leagues worse than anything Starlight was dealing with. Starlight was dealing with just, you know, a bunch of people in a circle who all wanted to do the same thing in slightly different ways, and they just wanted to, you know, say, well, we need this area for this area, well, I need to go for this area for this area. Really, really, really minor low-tier complaints. Whereas what Twilight is dealing with is the kind of thing that can actually cause damage, at least in the short term, to friendships and relationships. And Twilight just goes right through that. And the contrast is important. And look at my notes here. The life vests are there. Gotta have those life vests. How did they get back? Well, they crashed like 5 feet out of the shore. Which again shows that this is not really that big of an issue. At least in terms of the storm and all that. This is when I go ahead and mention one other thing. First of all, were the goblets planted? Like, did they put the chest out there for them to find? Because that's what I would have done. I would explain why the goblets are probably clean to put ice cream in them immediately, but let's not talk about that. I mean, wouldn't some seawater seep in? Although seawater ice cream, So, all three of them, this is when the episode falls apart for me. I enjoy the construction of this episode greatly. The visualization, the animation, the attention to detail, the storyboarding is incredible. This might actually be one of the most technically impressive episodes in the entire series so far. Not a joke. But, A, the three of them probably shouldn't have this kind of a disagreement at this stage in their friendship. B, they probably should have figured out what was going on their own without having to have these kind of disagreements. And even though C, even long-term friends need to work at communication, which is true, I don't feel like the episode earns that point at all. I don't feel like anything happened to earn a genuine, like I said earlier, like I alluded to earlier, a legitimate disagreement or grievance between two people who have been friends and care about each other for a long time. I mean, it's entirely possible that this would have just blown over in a couple of days. Like I said, short-term damage to the friendship. And... but I feel like, while the episode is extremely enjoyable to watch, its core point and premise is terribly handled, and I feel like this actually hinges into legitimate character assassination. Which, if you remember, we have a counter for, which we barely touch, but we're totally going to add to that here. Because this doesn't come up that often. Counter continuity counter. So how do we rate this? Because this is cotton candy. Oh, it's neat and it's tasty, but there is nothing here of real actual substance, and, well, like, I'd be fine with an average. I feel like average feels like a compromise there. What do y'all think? I can see why this was written by 4 people, consequently. Even though it's worth noting that 2 of those people always work together, and the other 2 people also always work together. So it's effectively made by 2 teams. Yeah, that's all. What's funny, Savicom, is that could be a whole episode. Like, they could have just focused on that exact point, because you're right. There's a lot to talk about there, and there's a lot to discuss there. And they don't. It's not even relevant to the episode, really. It's just kind of in the background. And then they plan something and it actually turns out. So that's nice. I'm seeing a bit of consensus in chat, so let's go ahead and go with average. God, which is just a really weird trend going forwards here. Which leaves us at the end of the episode.